The day my mother-in-law called me the charity case my son dragged home. I was standing in her kitchen holding a casserole dish I'd spent 3 hours making from scratch. I didn't say anything. I just set the dish down on the counter, smoothed my apron, and told her dinner would be ready in 20 minutes. That was my life for 4 years. Smile, absorb, survive. Her name doesn't matter. I call her what everyone in that family calls her, the matriarch, and she ruled that household like a country with only one citizen worth protecting. Her son, my husband, Theodore. Theodore was everything his mother had designed him to be. Charming at dinner parties. Handsome in the way that photographs well. He had his father's firm handshake and his mother's sharp tongue, though he saved that last part for when we were alone. In public, we were the picture-perfect couple. He'd put his hand on the small of my back and lean in close, and everyone would think, what a devoted husband. And I would think, he hasn't spoken to me in 3 days. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. My father drove a school bus for 31 years. My mother worked the returns desk at a department store until her feet gave out. We were the kind of family that clipped coupons not for fun but for survival, and I thought that was just life, until I got a full scholarship to Northwestern and realized there was an entirely different world that had been running parallel to mine the whole time. I studied mechanical engineering. I graduated third in my class. I got a job at a mid-sized aerospace firm in Chicago, which is where I met Theodore at a charity gala I attended as a +1 for my colleague. He asked me what I did, and when I told him, he looked genuinely surprised. Not impressed, surprised. Like he hadn't expected someone in my dress to have a real answer. I should have caught that look. I was 26 and flattered, and I missed it entirely. We dated for 2 years. I met his family at Thanksgiving. His mother's house in Winnetka. The kind of house where every surface has a story that's really just a price tag. She shook my hand and smiled and said, "Theodore has told us so much about you." She hadn't asked him a single thing, I later learned. She'd spent that first week after we met calling Theodore's college girlfriend, a girl named something like Pemberton, whose family had a boat and a house in Nantucket, trying to figure out if there was any chance of a reconciliation. There wasn't, so she pivoted to tolerance. Theodore proposed on my 28th birthday. His mother gave me a pearl bracelet at the engagement party and said in front of 6 of her closest friends, "We're just so glad Theodore found someone grounded." She said grounded the way other people say affordable. His friends' wives laughed politely. I laughed too. I was still learning the dialect. The first year of our marriage was fine. The second year, I started noticing things. How Theodore would call his mother after every argument, and I would hear him in the next room saying, "She's just sensitive," in the same tone you'd use to describe a car with a faulty sensor. How his mother would send me articles about managing household expectations, forwarded without comment. How at family dinners, when I mentioned my work, I had just been assigned to a propulsion system redesign that I was genuinely proud of. His uncle would nod and immediately turn to Theodore to ask about his portfolio. Theodore worked in private equity. He talked about deals the way people talk about sports scores, numbers without faces. I started working longer hours, partly because the project was demanding, partly because the office was the only place where what I said was listened to and written down and taken seriously. My manager, a quiet Korean-American woman who had been at the firm for 18 years, told me once, "You think differently than anyone else on this team." That's not a compliment I give lightly. I held on to that sentence for months. The problems with Theodore compounded quietly, the way mold does, and by our 3rd year of marriage I had become someone I didn't recognize. I apologized constantly. I second-guessed my own memories. I once cried in a bathroom stall at work, because I couldn't remember if I had in fact promised to be at his mother's birthday dinner when he said I had. I hadn't. I checked my calendar 3 times, but I apologized anyway, because it was easier than the 4 days of cold silence that followed any disagreement. His mother called me sensitive at a 4th of July cookout. I was telling his cousin about a problem we'd solved on the project, nothing classified, just the intellectual satisfaction of it, and she walked over, put her hand on my arm, and said, "You must be so tired, working so hard. I always thought women like you were so brave." Women like me. I still don't know exactly what she meant. I have a few guesses. I filed for divorce 11 months ago. Theodore didn't see it coming, which surprised me, because I had been going to therapy for a year and a half by then, and I had spent most of those sessions talking about leaving. I guess he thought I was too grounded to do it. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Logan Square with my 2 suitcases and my standing desk and the cast iron skillet that had been mine before the marriage and technically remained mine throughout it, even though somehow it had migrated to a shelf I couldn't reach. The divorce proceedings were unpleasant. His mother told her friends I had ambushed her son. One of those friends told someone who told my colleague, who told me over lunch with an expression of such careful neutrality that I knew she was also relaying the part she'd left out. I didn't ask. What nobody in that family knew. What I had told exactly 2 people, my therapist and my best friend from college who lives in Portland, was what had been happening at work for the past 18 months. I had been leading a small team on a component redesign project that had very quietly attracted the attention of people whose names I recognized from industry journals. The redesign addressed a thermal regulation problem that had been an open question in our field for years. Not in a flashy way, in a careful, incremental, we ran the numbers 400 times way. My manager had submitted our findings to a peer-reviewed journal 14 months ago. We had revised and resubmitted. We had waited. 3 months after I moved into my Logan Square apartment, the paper was accepted and published. 2 weeks after that, my manager called me into her office and told me that we had received an inquiry from a larger aerospace contractor, one of the top 3 in the country, who had read the paper and wanted to discuss a potential acquisition of our team's work, and, potentially, our team itself. I sat in that chair and I thought about the casserole dish. The negotiations took 6 months. I can't go into all the details, but I will say that I sat in rooms with lawyers and executives and people who used the word leverage like punctuation, and I held my own. I had spent 4 years learning to be invisible. It turns out invisibility is a very useful skill in a negotiation. People say things in front of you when they've underestimated you. The deal closed on a Thursday in March. The terms included a signing bonus and an equity stake in the acquiring company that I will not state precisely, except to say that it changed the category of problem I would have for the rest of my life. My father cried on the phone. My mother asked if I was eating enough. I didn't tell Theodore. There was no reason to. We were finalizing paperwork that had nothing to do with each other anymore. What I had built during our marriage had been built on my own time, in my own name, through my own work. His attorney had already confirmed it was not a marital asset. The part I didn't see coming was the gala. Our firm, the acquiring company technically, though the culture had shifted enough that I thought of it as ours, held an annual industry recognition dinner in April. Black tie, downtown Chicago, the kind of event where the shrimp cocktail is just a formality, and the real business happens in the hallway conversations. I had been before, as a junior attendee, the kind of person who stands near the edges and hopes someone introduces themselves. This year, they put my name on the program. I didn't know Theodore would be there. His firm had co-invested in a company that was being recognized in a different category. I found this out approximately 45 minutes before the event, when my colleague spotted his name on the attendee list and showed me her phone with the expression of someone handing you a live grenade. I thought about leaving. I thought about it for about 90 seconds. Then I put on the black dress I had bought for this occasion, and the earrings my mother had given me for my 30th birthday, and I went. He was at a table near the front. I saw him before he saw me. He was with 2 colleagues and a woman I didn't recognize who was laughing at something he'd said, and he looked exactly the same, which was somehow the strangest part. Like the last 2 years had happened to me and not to him at all. His mother was there too. I hadn't expected that. She was seated at his table in a silver dress, her hair done in the way she always did it for formal events, and she was talking to the man next to her, with the easy confidence of someone who has never once doubted her right to be in any room. The program started. There were remarks from the CEO of the acquiring company. There were 2 other recognition segments. And then the vice president of engineering, A man I had worked with closely for the past year stood at the podium and began talking about innovation and persistence, and the particular kind of intelligence that doesn't announce itself. He said my name. He said it the way people say names that mean something. He talked about the thermal regulation problem. He talked about what the solution had made possible. He said a number. Not my personal compensation, but the projected industry value of the application. And the room was very quiet for a moment in the way rooms get when a number lands differently than expected. I walked to the podium. My heels were not ideal for the carpet. I focused on that for the first 3 steps, which kept me from looking at Theodore's table. I gave a short speech. I had written it out and memorized it, not because I can't speak off the cuff, but because I wanted to get it right. I thanked my team. I thanked my manager. I said something about the 10 years it took me to stop apologizing for how my brain worked. And I watched a few people in the audience nod, in a way that told me they understood exactly what I meant without me having to explain it. I did not look at Theodore's table during the speech. I looked at the middle distance, the way my college public speaking professor had taught me, which means you appear to be making eye contact with everyone, while actually making eye contact with no one. But afterward, during the cocktail reception, I was standing with my manager and 2 colleagues when I felt the particular sensation of being watched. I turned. His mother was standing about 15 feet away. She was holding a glass of white wine and looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It wasn't quite recognition. It wasn't quite respect. It was something in between. Something that looked like the moment before a sentence forms, when the thought is still catching up to itself. She didn't come over. I didn't go to her. Theodore found me 20 minutes later near the bar, when my colleagues had dispersed. He looked like he was trying to find a way into a conversation he hadn't prepared for. "Congratulations," he said. That's a big deal." "Thank you," I said. "I didn't know you were." He started again. "I mean, I knew the project was going well, but I didn't realize." "No," I said, "you didn't." I said it without sharpness, just as a fact, the same way I had learned, slowly and at considerable personal cost, to state facts about myself without apology and without armor. Just, "This is true. This happened. This is who I am." He nodded. He looked at his shoes for a moment. Then he looked back up at me and said, "I think I made a mistake." I had imagined this moment, or something like it, so many times in therapy that my therapist and I had given it a name. We called it the apology scene. I had scripted versions of it where I said devastating things. I had scripted versions where I was generous and warm. I had scripted versions where I cried. What I hadn't scripted was feeling almost nothing. Not nothing as in numb. Nothing as in resolved. Like a problem I had already closed out of. "I think you did too," I said. "I hope you figure out what kind of person you want to be." And then my colleague tapped my arm, because there was someone I needed to meet, and I excused myself. And I walked away from Theodore for the last time in a room full of people who had just heard my name called from a stage. His mother, I was told later by someone who had been near her when it happened, asked the woman beside her who I was. She had forgotten, or perhaps she had never quite registered, what my last name had been when I was her daughter-in-law. The woman next to her apparently looked at her with some confusion and said the name of the paper, the company, the deal, and his mother said, "Oh, just that." Oh, I drove home that night with the windows down even though it was only 50 degrees, and Chicago in April has opinions about that sort of thing. I drove past my old neighborhood, the one Theodore and I had lived in, not on purpose, just because at the building and felt curious, maybe. The way you feel about a place in an old photograph. It existed. I was there. I am somewhere else now. My apartment was quiet when I got home. The kind of quiet I used to find uncomfortable, and have grown over this past year to understand as mine. I poured a glass of water and stood at the window, and looked out at the lights, and thought about my father's hands, which are large and rough from 31 years of a steering wheel, and how he'd cried on the phone and said, I always knew you were going to do something big." He had always known. He told me that every year, every graduation, every small achievement I brought home. What I had spent a decade learning was how to believe him. I set the glass down. I looked at my reflection in the dark window for a moment. Just a second. Just long enough to recognize the person looking back. Then I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed.